Ladies and gentlemen, I want to echo the comments made this morning. The REIQ is calling on the government to repeal this latest land tax amendment. There's no doubt that this is coming at the worst possible time. I think we have to understand that there's only so much pressure that investors are prepared to accept. As we said when we first got word of this land tax regime reform, investors are sick of being the ATM for this state government. Last year, we saw this government raise some $6 billion in stamp duty. It's very clear that investors are tired of constantly being the ones to have to put their hand in their pocket. It's easy to look at this land tax regime and to assume that investors can afford it, but make no mistake, this will have a very damaging impact on every single Queenslander. It will increase rents. It will also have an impact on commercial entities who operate businesses in Queensland, and it may well impact employment levels. We are calling on the state government to urgently repeal this land tax regime. There wasn't sufficient consultation before its introduction, and there's still time to ensure that we can get rid of this damaging change before it comes into effect. Yeah, that's right. Well, in December, just before Christmas, we got word about the proposal. And of course, at Christmas time, people weren't paying attention. And what we've now seen is that the bill's gone into the House very quietly. There's been very little spoken about it. And it's only now that it's actually been established and has become law. And accountants and advisors are starting to let investors know that the full impact and consequences are being understood. And as a result, we are now being inundated with calls by investors, by real estate businesses, and of course by the general community in disbelief. Make no mistake, this is an unprecedented move. There is no other state or territory in this country that treats land tax in this way. And indeed, we've already seen some law professors come out and wonder about its legality and whether it's actually constitutional. So I wouldn't be surprised if we actually see a legal challenge being mounted. It will absolutely hurt property prices. We're already seeing the impact of that. We're already hearing stories about people who own investment properties in Queensland instructing real estate agents to sell. We're also hearing from buyers agents that they are now dissuading people from investing in Queensland. And also, you would be forgiven for being mistaken in thinking that this land tax will only impact if you live outside of the state. Certainly when the Treasurer speaks about it, those are the examples he gives. He refers to the wealthy Sydney-sider who owns property in Queensland. But make no mistake, this regime applies equally to Queenslanders. It doesn't matter whether you're domiciled in Queensland or interstate. And so we know that what it will do is, if you are thinking about investing, you won't invest in Queensland. And what we should be doing is encouraging investment in the Sunshine State, not trying to deter people from investing in Queensland. Well, we're already starting to see the impact of increasing interest rates. We are seeing the market slowing down. The good news is we've still got a good solid market here in Queensland, but certainly what we're seeing is that days on market is stretching out. The property price growth that we've been experiencing over the last couple of years is starting to slow. And what we know is that all of this has a cumulative effect. We've got increasing interest rates, we've got stamp duty still at very high levels, and of course now all of this makes it very unappealing to invest in Queensland. Yeah, it's a good question. So what we're starting to see is people are starting to understand the impact that this will have. As David has already mentioned, the government's own example makes reference to an increase of some 350% in the example that they give on their own website. It's actually very difficult to know how many landlords will be impacted. One of the challenges with this regime is that there's been very little information that's actually been provided by the government. The government has given an estimate that it plans to raise some $20 million, but it's not clear how they've arrived at that figure. The modelling is not clear, and indeed we're already hearing from investors, both commercial and residential, who are wondering about how they will be impacted, and the rules aren't clear. Indeed, recently at estimates, the under-treasurer, the treasurer himself, was unable to answer questions about how it's calculated and about the specifics. Well, this is an argument that we often hear, that if we can deter investors, that it makes it easier for first home buyers, or that it makes it easier for renters to enter the market. I think it's important that we understand that 36% of Queenslanders rent their home. We know that there will always be a proportion of renters in Queensland. Indeed, we have a higher proportion than most other states and territories in Australia. So investors are critical. Of course, we want to see first home buyers entering the market. Of course, we want to see renters transition. But this simplistic argument that we should deter investment and somehow that will magically allow first home buyers to enter the market, that's simply not true and far too simplistic a characterisation. Yes, indeed. The Treasurer does like to refer to a loophole. Quite frankly, there is no loophole to be closed. The example he gives is a Sydney-sider buying property in Queensland, and he refers to that as being a loophole that Sydney-sider need not pay land tax. And what we know is, again, that's fictitious, because this land tax regime will apply equally to Queenslanders and to others living interstate. There is no loophole to be closed. The simple reality that in every state and territory in Australia, one pays land tax based on the property holdings within the borders of that state or territory. That is logical. That is what every state government in this country does when it comes to land tax. So this is unprecedented. It is only Queensland that is asking you to pay land tax based on property that is held outside of our borders, and quite frankly, it's illogical. Yeah. 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 Well, look, what I would say about that is land tax is a state-based tax. It's used for the community here in Queensland. It is not logical, in our view, to have to pay land tax based on the value of property holdings you hold elsewhere. Those other states and territories where those other properties are held, again, their land tax regime differs from ours, but you will then pay land tax based on the systems that are in place in those states or territories where those properties are held. That is the way that land tax applies in every state and territory. What we are proposing is unprecedented and very unique, and it doesn't address any loophole.